What's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is Build a Bot episode number 5. Today, I am only joined by one of the crew, Mr. Matthew Farmer. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you, John. I'm very excited to be showing off, well, not only my lockdown bouffant hairdo, which I thought it good to record, but also my Power Virtual Agents hoodie there. So I'm quite proud to show that on screen.
Man, I'm jealous. I love zip hoodies. Look, I'm rocking one too, but it is not a PVA one. Come on, PVA team. What's going on? What's going on? All right, Matt. So take a second and introduce yourself. Let everybody know what we're going to be talking about today. And then the floor is yours, my friend.
That's great. Thanks, John. So yeah, I'm Matt Farmer. I'm one of the program managers in the Power Platform CAT team working with Power Virtual Agents. So I work with customers using Power Virtual Agents and the sorts of technologies every day. And I suppose this series of videos is all taking some of the knowledge we use in the field and delivering it to people out there.
All right. And so what are we talking about today?
So let's flip over to my slide and we'll have a look. So today we're talking about extending PVA with the Azure bot framework. So how to make your bot even more functional if you've got interesting use cases that perhaps you can't quite deliver in the base PVA tooling. So how do we make it even better?
Awesome. So
the other way to think about it is if it's making a Megabot. So if your bot that you've built in PVA today is like, and I'm dating myself with this reference somewhat, a Starscream. How can you make it a Megatron? Yeah, I've just lost 50% of people watching this. Or we can
look it up. Look it up.
Yeah. It's fine. Or a Proud to an Optimus Prime, something like that. Anyway, how do you take the bot you've done in PVA, and when you've got those really interesting use cases that really add a huge amount of value, how do you deliver them? So just going kind of back to a slide we talked about earlier is how the Power Virtual Agents is built up. So built up connecting to all the goodness in the Power Platform, but it's also built on top of Azure. So, and this is where the link between the two is really important, because not only is Power Virtual Agents built on top of the bot framework and Azure Bot Service using cognitive services, but we can also dive in and reuse those services ourselves when we build out a bot. So that's what we're going to look at today, is how we use those bot framework components to deliver different use cases on the PVA platform. So the word of caution with this, right, is that you have options when you're building extensibility with PVA. Don't take those options lightly, and also don't assume you have to go for the most complicated thing first. And that's why this slide is here, right? You can go from look at a no-code solution to what you want to do. Then we have options where you can go, do a low-code solution, and we'll be talking about Bot Framework Composer and what that can do for us. And then you have almost complete control with using a Bot Framework skill. The trade-off is that's very much a pro-code solution, and it requires more input and effort to actually deliver. So be aware of all the options and pick the right one for the job. And this one goes into a bit more detail, just about the differences between them. Obviously, Power Automate we've covered a lot within this series already, and it's kind of the default option for building out functionality within Power Virtual Agents. You can take Power Automate and run it in the same solution as PVA. It's a completely no-code solution if you want it to be, and you can build it then and there, and it's easy for non-devs to build out. Bot Framework Composer, as we're going to look at later, the way we've implemented it in PVA, as we'll see later, allows you to run it within the PVA process, which brings huge benefits. But it's more of a low-code solution. You do have some dev concepts creeping in there, so you've got to have a bit of a background with building those kind of solutions to be able to take full advantage of Bot Framework Composer.
I'm excited to see it.
Yep. And then Bot Framework Skills. That is a completely pro-code solution. It's a pretty advanced dev experience built out in Visual Studio, gives you complete flexibility, and you can do things like run different recognizer engines. But the trade-off with that is it's running in its own process. You've got to manage the application lifecycle. There's a whole bunch of extra things you have to do to run a skill.
That sounds hard.
Hey, if you need it and it does what you need it to do, it's super effective. And of course, there's also benefits of running in its own process that I'll talk about in a bit. So Bot Framework Composer, I'm going to dive into a quick demo in a second, but just to kind of talk about what it is, it's a tool that's actually been around a while that the Bot Framework team have provided. What we have now is integration of that within PVA. At the time we're recording this, it's in a preview. That may change at some point. I would expect it to, but right now it's a preview, but people can go and try it from the PVA portal. It's more complicated than just building out a topic within PVA. Obviously, PVA does a bunch of stuff to make it easy for people to understand the process of building out topics and setting trigger phrases and things like that. With Composer, you need to understand a bit more about what's going on under the hood, because then you can take advantage of those concepts. But you can do things like, and I've got some examples, we can do adaptive cards, which is a way of rendering what comes back in the bot. We can do more complicated dialogue trees. We can have a lot more flexibility in the way we implement our bot. And I can do things like send multiple responses or validate things. You can use regular expressions in there with a caveat on how you do it. And I can also call out to an HTTP endpoint from within Composer.
We have to test one feature on it. I want to see, can it do a line break?
We're going to be testing in production here, John, if we give that
That's
a go.
Right. That's right.
Give it a go. So this is a little diagram of, how it fills into the architecture within PVA. So, the base architecture, if you're building out PVA, you've got your entities and user topics that you define, system topics, out-of-the-box analytics, and then you publish your PVA bot to channels, right? So that's what the bits are there. And we talked about in the past, kind of you can use Power Automate off the back of PVA to do integration into SaaS services and Q&A maker and other things like that. Where Bot Framework Composer comes in is when you create a Bot Framework dialog or trigger, they sit within the PVA runtime. As you're going to see, we use the Bot Framework Composer tool, which is a separate tool set to build them, but we publish them back to PVA, and then you package the whole thing up in a solution. So the application lifecycle story with using Bot Framework Composer with PVA is simple. It's exactly the same as using normal PVA. So you don't have to worry about deployments. You don't have to worry about any different ALM constructs. It's one thing. You ship it along with everything you're building, which makes life a lot easier. And of course, there's no additional cost to doing that as well. You're just creating stuff within PVA and paying for it just the same you do with PVA.
Beautiful. I like that.
So let me flip across to a demo of doing that.
All right.
So here's my test bot, map bot that I have here. And those of you familiar to PVA will be familiar with some of the things we've got here. I've got normal topics and trigger phrases that I normally have when setting up PVA. They're no different. What I do have is some additional things here. If I hover over these, you'll see this is a composer dialog, and this one is as well. Oops, composer dialog, and that one is a composer trigger. And they've been built in Bot Framework Composer. If I go and have a look into the products dialog, for example, what you see in PVA when you go to the authoring canvas is basically it's a Bot Framework dialog. I can call it from another PVA topic, and it sits within the PVA interface ready to be used. Let's jump into Bot Framework Composer and see how it looks. So I've got this preview button here. So everybody should be able to see that. It's going to try and open the client locally on my machine. There's the client. So Bot Framework Composer is a standalone development environment, all set around this kind of low-code layout for building Bot Framework assets. It's just going to pull down my updated instance, because the idea is I go into PVA, I open Bot Framework Composer, and it pulls down the latest configuration of my bot, and I manage the pieces that I want to within Bot Framework Composer.
So I gotta say, I love that you named it Matt Bot, because my bot is named John Bot. So high five on that.
It's either great minds think alike or both equally lacking creativity.
Exactly.
I don't know. So there's a few different things within here, and we're going to dig into. I've got this special trigger. So this is a trigger defined in Bot Framework Composer. So like you saw in PVA, with trigger phrases set up here that I can publish back to PVA. And this actually links to another dialog, which I've defined here, that I can click on and open. And you'll see in this interface the sort of thing we're doing here. Now, I can't give you a full rundown and training on how to use this. It takes a bit of getting used to and running through some of the examples. But hopefully this gives you an idea of the sort of experience you have when creating it. So for example, I'm doing a very dev-like thing here of setting a property. I'm just doing it in this box. I've called it array. It's an array, and I've defined that array there as days of the week. And what this dialog actually does is just give the users a list of days. It prompts them with a multiple choice here. And you can define the user input type that you do. So the output format here is an index card. And you'll see when I show it that lists all the array items one after the other. Nice. I'm then prompting for the user's input choice. And then what I actually do is I send them a response. Now the response here, hopefully you can see this isn't too small, is a function that we process. So if I go over to, I can actually see the code that we're running to generate that response. So you can write code within Bot Framework Composer. Now, obviously, this is a fairly silly use case example, but as you can see, you can write case statements, switch statements, sorry, with cases in it and the default, just like you would in code, right? And I've defined the function here, and I'm outputting the value that I'm returning to that.
Tuesday special is an extra step on every ladder.
I may have defined some of those myself.
It's genius.
That may not be an entirely realistic use case, but we're trying to keep it a little bit simple.
I love it. I love it.
So here's another dialogue. So this was the products dialogue that we looked at earlier. This one just does sends a response based on an input value we're providing. So we're providing the user's city as an input value. We've defined here, and we're running that function. So again, if we go to the response here and we see how that's defined, there's a whole bunch of code here. So for example, I'm defining our products list, which is a rubber duck, a ladder, and a boomerang. Slightly limited shop inventory, but it works for the demo. I'm defining images that are associated with them as variables. And then I'm writing some code to define an adaptive card layout that I'm going to return to the client within PVA. So I'm adding in those images. Now, these are pretty simplistic examples, but the idea is it shows you the flexibility and the control you have within Bot Framework Composer, but also the trade-off here being that you do need some of those dev skills to be able to understand how to render those. But it's a much more simple experience than building out a skill, which we'll get to next. Gotcha. So that's my dialogues and triggers that I've defined within Bot Framework Composer. What you do when you've finished doing that, I'm not going to go through the process now because it takes a few seconds, but I can select the bot that I want to deploy to and publish, and then it will update my PVA bot with the changes I've made.
Okay, cool. Are you gonna test it? See what
yeah, we're gonna test it.
Okay, cool. Let's check it out. I'll ask my question after.
Okay, no problem. So, for example, let's go through the specials one we did first, which was showing different special offers on different days. So I'm just going to say special offers, and we're going to get back a response. So this is the response coming back from the dialogue. You can see we've got track between topics on, so you can see how it's triggered the Bot Framework trigger there. I'm going to select a day. Oh no, John. Please select a day.
We already talked about Tuesday. I think let's try Friday. Let's see what's happening on Friday.
I'm going to select Friday, and then 10% off everything. That's a pretty good deal, I think.
Everything.
For being a Friday.
I love it.
You can have all the boomerangs you want,
Yeah.
So again, very simplistic, but by just, if you wanted that different kind of layout based on array of values, obviously those array of values could come from somewhere else.
Yep.
You can then load those in and get an experience within PVA that's a little bit different.
Well, and for those of you who are not familiar with PVA, just so you know, that layout we just saw where you could select the day, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that layout does not come in PVA. You can't in native PVA, you can't create something like that. What you can do is create an option set, but that layout that we just saw was specific, brought in by Bot Composer. And so just want to point that out of like, oh, why is that different? There's going to be a lot of different layouts here that you can get that you can't get straight from PVA.
Absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely right to call that out, because we've been running through this quick. So that's the important thing. It's quite often a customer requirement, right? Is we want it to work this way, and when you get that requirement back, this is the time where you either say, well, we can do it natively in PVA like this, or we could go into Bot Framework Composer and do it the other way. We have choice with this feature to do it.
Totally.
So here's just showing the products composer dialog that we created. We're calling it after asking for a city. So again, I will just show us using this. So this is asking, what products can be delivered. We're just going to cheat and say delivery, and then trigger into that. It's what city I'm in. As always, I will use the fair city of Fareham as my example. And then we're triggering into the bot framework dialog. See, we've jumped across here, and then we can choose whether we need a rubber duck, a ladder, or a boomerang from this very specialized company I've set up here.
That is so legit. So again, this is not possible straight from Power Virtual Agents. You cannot display a thumbnail like this. You cannot have it select in such a way. That is super cool. I'm excited about this.
And yeah, so those advanced layouts for things that really, really matter, this really gives you a lot of flexibility to deliver exactly what you want back to the customer.
Well, it just gives so much more character to the bot, right? Your user experience goes up exponentially now because it's interesting. It's just not a text exchange.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a lot more flexibility than what I just showed here, right?
Yeah.
You can really go to town on it if you want to. Great. Let me switch back to the slides and then we'll talk about skills. So that's Bot Framework Composer. And if you remember that continuum starting with Power Automate, Bot Framework Composer is the middle one, gives you more flexibility. It's less flexible than using a skill, but it's a lot easier to deploy and manage. But if we really, really want full control, and flexibility in how we interact, then the next option is using a bot framework skill. But there's a picture here of a set of tools to go with it, because this is very much a pro dev experience, right? Mm-hmm. You do this when you really need that pro dev experience, or to manage the skill in a separate process, or you really are trying to do something that's far outside the capability boundaries of the base toolset. But the point is, and the really great thing about PVA and this toolset is you don't have a cliff. You don't get to a point where you suddenly say, well, that's completely impossible, or at least we very rarely do, because we have these different choices of how we do this extensibility. Mm-hmm. So bot framework skills are effectively a way to package up a bot framework bot in a reusable way. It can be pulled into a bot and used within it. And that works for bot framework bots on their own, which PVA is a kind of, I suppose, or into PVA. So we quite often see this where customers have lots and lots of bots and they want a reusable component, kind of almost like an API, right? This is like a specialized kind of API that's reusable within all your different bots. So we can take that bot framework skill, write the code for it and deploy it, and then use it within PVA.
Fair.
Architecture-wise, what does that look like? So we'll go back to this design that we looked at earlier. The main difference here to notice is that the bot framework skills we're creating sit completely outside the solution boundary of PVA, right? When you're deploying a bot framework skill, you're deploying it to Azure Bot Service. You're deploying a separate Azure service on its own runtime, with its own scalability factors, with its own application lifecycle that you need to be concerned around. Now, there's benefits to doing that. If you need those things, you may want to develop that bot skill in isolation from any PVA bots you have. Or, it may be that you have pro code people doing that with the strict application lifecycle that you apply to the bot, and you may have lots of PVA creators calling into that skill with less rigor because there may be internal use cases, things like that. It gives you a lot more flexibility, but the trade-off is there's more work to do to implement it. So that's how it kind of looks from a diagram point of view. Let's have a look at the real thing. So where do you build bot framework skills? You're building them in Visual Studio. So this is some code that is used to actually trigger a bot framework skill using the activity handler interface on message async. So I'm not going to obviously go through every single thing we've done here, but what I will call your attention to is the manifest. When you define a bot framework skill, you need to define a manifest that describes it. And that is what other bots use to work out how to interact with it. So it's kind of like similar to kind of an open API description for an API, if you're familiar with that. It basically says, here's this bot framework skill, here are the things it's doing, here's the inputs and outputs. Okay. And you can see here for this one, so this is an example bot framework skill that does kind of a custom authentication scheme using an encrypted token. And it's that kind of use case that it works really well for, something where you really, really need to write pro code, write C# to be able to deliver the use case, and then integrate that into PVA. So, for example, I've defined what my endpoint is that I'm serving my skill from. I've defined the activities that it's providing, so kind of the endpoint and what's going into it, so the value and the result value, what's coming out of it. And there's types there defined to do that. And again, you want to learn more about this documentation on lots of these things. When I go into the bot itself, this is a super, super simple one that just is sending messages back to the PVA channel. So I'm send activity async, then it's doing some work to kind of crunch the input and work out whether somebody is authenticated, and then it posts back to the PVA with a success or failure result with a token if that's appropriate. There's a whole bunch of, I should say on this, a whole bunch of examples that this stuff is all coming from. So the bot framework team do a great job of documenting all this and actually distributing all of these on GitHub. So if this is something you want to do, the skills are actually right at the end, the 80 and 81. So the simple bot to bot skill, which is very similar to what I just showed there. Or if you want to go a bit more complicated, using the skills dialogue example, which allows you to create much more complicated conversation flows. But there's a fair bit of work to dig in to do that, but that's where you can get started and start building out your bot.
When I saw that code, that was what I was gonna ask. Was like, where can I copy some code from for this?
It requires some understanding, but like all good developers, I copied a chunk of that from somewhere else. It's
nice.
So how do you manage them within PVA? So if you go into the manage menu, I can jump across to skills, and you see I've registered that skill here as a decryption skill. So when I register it, you go through a process of registering your manifest. I won't do that now, but I can see the manifest that I showed you in my code. Basically, this is pulling this down after I've deployed my code to Azure Bot Service. And it's validating that the skill meets the requirements that PVA has, so that we can put it in the notes. But there's some documentation there on making sure that your the skill meets PVA's requirements on things like inputs and outputs and how you define it. And as you can see here, I've defined this as one input and one output, and obviously you can vary that. There are some limits, I believe, on the exact numbers. But it sets it up, and you'll see when I use it, very similar to like using Power Automate or something else within PVA.
Nice.
So I've used that within a topic. So if I go into this one, so it's token authentication is the example I'm using. And again, this is just showing some kind of custom authentication. And what I'm doing here, and I should just say, obviously, if you're using Azure Active Directory, then that's all baked in. Yeah, you only use some custom authentication when you know you need it. Just call that out. This is kind of a customer has a specific requirement, so we've gone a different route than using an OAuth provider or something like that. So basically, I'm taking the token value that was passed in, I'm passing it to the value into the skill, just like I would if I was using Power Automate, and I get a value back, and then I can base some decisions on it and use it. So once you set up your skill, using it within PVA is really simple. So it's how you can, if you want to completely disconnect the pro code developers from the low or no code developers, you've done that within PVA. They're not having to worry about the code behind it.
Yeah, that's two very nice sandboxes, or well, I mean, three very nice sandboxes, really. I love the distinction here that you're making between them and kind of how I think each step up, right, goes up a little in complexity and requires some different skills. But I think it's fantastic to see how the team is segmenting things in this way and giving such ability to each group of people.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, John. Absolutely. So let's just show that working just to prove it does. This is a bit of a cheat demo because it's designed to be set up with a custom canvas passing in authentication value. But for now, we'll ignore that and just say we're going to do order info. And then it's going to ask me for my authentication token, which normally it would never do, but we'll just use something unpredictable like ABC123.
Highly secure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then what happens is it spins up in the background the skill, and what it's actually done is jump between the different topics based upon it. But it's looked up the details and returned, got value back. And what it's actually used is Power Automate to then go up and look up the name of the customer being testing suppliers. Your order is on the way.
Nice.
So that was a super whirlwind tour of the different integration options with Bot Framework Skills. As I say, that I think the thing to call out that's most important is people understand that there are choices and you don't necessarily have to always choose one or the other. If you know what the different options are and the trade-offs with them, then you can make the right choice and implement the functionality you need in your PVA bot.
It's awesome, man. This is great. Thank you for the whirlwind tour, Matthew. It's fantastic to see.
I'm just so happy I got to video my hair.
All right, so you guys at home, you know what to do. First things first, go ahead and get down in the description. We'll have a link so you can try out PVA. We'll have a link to some of the documentation shown. And then I'll also put a link down to the Power Virtual Agents community. There's a community of users where you can go and ask questions and get help with your problems. The team is there. We have great super users who are other community members there. So definitely check all of that out. Next thing is click like and get subscribed so that you don't miss another video. And the final thing is much love from us. Thank you for coming and hanging out. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.